All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. This is one of two in a series through Tayo. Tonight we're going to be focusing on Filipinos on becoming racial justice advocates. Just want to first introduce myself. I'm Lizelle Tinglao. I'm immediate past president of FilPro, which is the Filipino Young Leaders Program. FilPro is a network of high-performing next-generation leaders who advance the Philippines and the Filipino people through their advocacy and expertise in various industries. We continue to expand the pipeline of Filipino young leaders in the diaspora. By connecting them to the motherland, we foster collaborative multinational relationships that create innovations and support the socioeconomic progress of the global Filipino community. We are 501c3. Based in the US. We're most known for our signature immersion program, which, by the way, I will plug that our applications for this year's program are open. They're open until May 31st. And in addition to that, we do more than just the immersion program. We also do mentorship, other various events, and our other big project that we launched is Tayo. Which you can see the icon, the logo that's on the title slide, that's on the screen right now. So Tayo is a project of FilPro. It is an innovative data hub that empowers Philippine XAO communities by collecting data, fostering partnerships, publishing culturally relevant insights, and developing leaders to create an equitable and sustainable future. So Tayo started out as a rapid response to COVID-19. We saw a lot of our communities sharing a lot of misinformation. So we wanted to try to create some culturally tailored interventions to help prevent that and prevent more of our folks from being harmed by that. Tonight's program would not be possible without support from NCAPA. FilPro was one of 15 awardees that was awarded a racial equity grant. So NCAPA is the National Council of Asian Pacific Americans. So these racial equity grants, these funds are to support initiatives that advance racial equity and promote civic engagement within the Asian American Pacific Islander communities. So we'd like to acknowledge NCAPA for giving us the necessary support and funding to bring you resources like tonight's program that you are all about to participate in. So with that, I'd like to introduce our facilitator, also one of our Tayo content producers, Jovi Galit, who's going to walk us through how Filipinos can become racial justice advocates.
Thanks, Lucille. Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining. I know this topic is not often easy. It's also not always talked about in our community. So I'm really, really grateful and just want to start off by saying thank you to all of you for being here. I often start off my session with the pasasalamat, meaning gratitude. It means a lot to me. It means a lot to our work here at Tayo that people are really engaged and are at least starting to be engaged in this conversations of racial equity. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot to unpack in this space today. And I also want to prompt and start off by saying that we're not going to be able to comprehensively go through all of the topics that we're going to be talking about here today. This is sort of just an introductory space, but also I hope that it can move people to do some actions in solidarity, further their solidarity actions after, however way you're taking the learnings that you are engaging here today. Okay. I'd like to start off by introducing myself. My name is Jovi and my pronouns are she, her. I am actually based here in Toronto, colonially known as Toronto in so-called Canada. I am a community organizer. I have done work in racial justice organizing for the past decade, specifically working with immigrant and migrant Filipinos, supporting their rights as well as their new ways of living here in Canada. So a lot of what I'm going to be speaking of today is not only, of course, this is my experience in Canadian and in the Canadian context, but also my knowledge of racial equity and justice for the broader Filipino people, not just within Canadian borders, but of course, applicable to the Filipino American experience, as I've done a lot of work in that scope as well, and also the realities of our people in the motherland. This is me when I was 5. In spaces like this, I don't really put a cute headshot because you see me in camera anyways, or for others, people see me in person. So I thought it's best for me to just honor my 5-year-old self and how she's come a long way into the person that you are meeting now. 5-year-old Jovi, although I had a cute bowl cut, I never really knew everything that we're going to be talking about here today. It's not always that Filipino children in our communities are taught at an early age that we deserve so much more. So I'd really like to dedicate this space for her. I'm also born and raised in Science City of Muñoz, Nueva Ecija. That is Central Luzon, for folks who may not know. I did not immigrate to Canada until I was about 19. My mother is who I learned so much from, is a temporary worker here, and eventually sponsored my brother and I to reunite with her after 5 years of being separated. So there's a lot of grounding and rootedness in understanding the migration realities of our people, and a lot of that I'll be sharing here today too. Aside from being an artist, I am also the founder of Pinay Collection. I'm not gonna go through a lot of that, but if you'd like to check it out, feel free to do so. And lastly, I am an ate. I'm a very pesky eldest daughter. I only have one sibling, but I feel bad for him being my sibling because he's probably gone through and put up a lot just to be my brother, but I love him to bits. Okay, I'm gonna pause every now and then just to make sure I get to check the chat. And I really encourage people to engage throughout the session. Oh, thanks, Lizelle. Yes, the website is over there for Pinay Collection. Thanks for the note. Okay, before we get started, I hope folks are okay sharing. You can share by unmuting yourselves. You can also share by sharing your answer in the chat. We want to just very quickly ground our space by reflecting on how are we feeling, how are we showing up as we engage in these conversations here today. So I want to ask you all, kumusta, or how are you in English? What brought you here today, if you want to answer that, or what feelings are coming up for you as you engage in this space. Okay. So again, if folks would like to unmute, feel free to unmute. What brought you here today? What feelings are coming up for you as you engage in the space? Or you can also share in the chat. I'm going to be pausing here and want to let folks know that I'm very comfortable with silence as a facilitator and give people time to think through some of the answers and the questions that I'm going to be asking you also. I hope you all are cool with that. And I'm just going to be pausing just to let people share answers. Hey, Gabriel, I hope I pronounced that right.
Yeah, hi everyone, and thank you for holding the space. Gabriel Tanglao, he, him pronouns, living in New Jersey, traditionally Lenni Lenape land, and I'm here just excited to reconnect with our community in Infinity Space, talking about racial and social justice. I'm a former teacher and now work in the labor movement in the Human and Civil Rights Department for the National Education Association. So it's nice to be in community with you all.
Thanks, Gabriel. Thanks for starting us off. Oh, amazing to hear folks from the labor movement. The Labor Movement Day just also passed on May 1st. So yeah, power to the workers of the world. Thanks, Gabriel. Okay, I see Mark. Hey, Mark. Thanks for joining us. Feelings include curiosity and excitement. All right, we're starting off with a great start. Thanks, Lucelle. All right. Anyone else who would like to join some of the sharings happening?
Yeah, I can share. Hi, everyone. Jody Gutierrez. I'm originally from New York, but I'm now based in Arizona. Um, really looking forward to like just connecting with the community. What brought me here today is just kind of reflections when the Asian hate movement started, and here in Arizona, it's particularly palpable. I remember being in the grocery store, and there would be just trucks that would circle the parking lot, you know, with the American flag, and we all know what that means, right? And it just kind of, I felt a certain way about it, and I didn't know how to best handle that situation if that situation ever come up again. So just looking forward to hearing resources, or like, you know, if any of you have experienced anything like that, how would you handle that situation?
Mhm. Thanks, Jody. Thanks for sharing that too. There's a lot of vulnerability that comes with, understanding the feeling of unsafety, but also understanding that we too have a role to play in not only in the dismantling of the oppression of our own people, but that of the others. So thanks for sharing that. All right. We got Kat in the chat, excited to learn more techniques in engaging within my community as well as outside. All right. And also from Alex, second-year medical student in Southern California, wanting to explore how I can contribute to surgical health equity for Filipinos. I have personal lived experiences and have observed from my previous career as an RN and now as a med student how racial justice needs to be at the forefront of health equity progress. Thanks so much for sharing that, Alex. I think a lot of what we're going to talking about here is a lot of grounding, and I'm going to be sharing that with you in a bit. I think it's really important for us to understand our why, not only why we're getting into the space, but why we want to be involved and why we want to further racial equity work. So there's going to be a lot of reflections in that, and hopefully those reflections will lead more into understanding of what is your role and how you can further that role into the spaces you have influence in, including whether that be in your field or in your workplaces or school. Hi, Eddie from Chicago, second-gen Filipino American. Never seen this topic discussed within this community. I'm excited to learn. Thanks for sharing that, Eddie. Yeah, it's not often that we do discuss, but definitely there needs to be more discussions around this in the Filipino community. And hopefully this is not the last. Okay. Anyone else? And I won't push folks if you don't want to introduce, that's cool with me too. I'm just grateful for folks who are able to do so, but I want to give folks
Hi,
Hi.
this is Rufino with the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement. We are NCAPA members, and as a Filipino American here in Hawaii, we're working on civic engagement work, a project called Get Out the Vote. As you may know, Filipinos in Hawaii make up #2 in the voting population here, but for some reason, people in Hawaii don't vote, and so it's unfortunate, and we're trying to do things to get people to do that, especially with Hawaii's 100% mail-in ballot now. So yeah, I'm looking to learn what you folks do in your states and how you engage your community.
Thanks, Rufino.
I'm driving, so I'm gonna turn my camera off.
All good. I hope you're safe. Okay, thank you. All right, anyone else? Last call for folks to share. I think that's most. I'm just looking at our chat list. I mean, our guest list here just to make sure. Okay. I think that's most of us too. Okay. Thanks so much for starting us off. For the next part, I would like us to just very quickly go through some community guidelines. As I mentioned, many of the conversations that we're going to be having here in this space are not often talked about in the Filipino community, and oftentimes many of them are also taboo still, whether we like it or not. So I think it's important for us to ground the space with a mutual understanding of what we're about to engage in, including embracing openness and leaving judgment behind. I think many of us here are coming from different spaces. Many of folks may probably be very familiar with racial justice and have a lot of experience building solidarity work and collective movements, while others may just be starting in their in their journey, and there's wherever you are in your journey, there's definitely nothing to be ashamed about that. It's important that we keep ourselves open to learning from each other, because the space is what every space that I build is often rooted in reciprocal learning, meaning you're not just learning from what I'm about to share, but I'm also learning from all of you. And I hope you all can keep that in mind, and feel free to continue sharing, asking questions throughout the session. We don't have to wait until the end during the Q&A to ask questions. Feel free to raise your hand or share some thoughts and questions in the chat. Value nuances and in-betweens. Binary way of thinking is a colonial way of thinking, right? So when we think that just either or, we often miss the in-between. So it's important that when approaching these topics, we also keep in mind that it could be a yes and there's a lot of nuances in every slide that I'm about to share. Take up space and offer back space. Feel free to share, ask questions as much as you can, as I mentioned earlier, but also be mindful that if others are not sharing, it's important to also give folks space in however way they want to show up. And lastly, let's center confidentiality. Looks like we're a fairly small group today, which is good. Also, I hope folks can get comfortable and really feel a bit more vulnerable and share their experiences and learnings. But we really just want to emphasize that whatever is shared in this room, in this virtual room, at the later time, especially during the time where we're going to be doing an activity which is not recorded, I hope that stays in here. Right. Any questions about our community guidelines? Any objections? Okay. All right, then I see Ted introducing in the chat. Hey, Ted. Okay, I see Ted, born and raised in the US, lived in the Philippines for 30 years, married to a Filipino and have 28-year-old daughter, a Philam who was born and raised in the Philippines, but now lives in the US working as a journalist. I'm also a journalist and have written extensively about Filipinos and their lives here and overseas. Always interested in learning more, and that's why I'm here. Often see Filipinos as one of the great engines of the world, yet are often unseen. My mind and ears are wide open. Thanks, Ted. That is also part of our team, so I'm really glad to see him. Okay. All right. Lastly, I think I'm going to skip through this one because I think Lisel have already mentioned the heaviness and topics that we're going to be talking about today. So really just want to emphasize that if people at any time you feel like you need to step away or breathe and topics are becoming too heavy for you, feel free to step out. Feel free to do so. Do what you must to take care of yourself. All right, so today we're going to be talking about quite a few things. We're in the introduction section now. The next part is we're going to be unpacking our why, including...
Oh, sorry, Jovi. I think Josh is able to share now.
Okay, thanks.
One more intro. Yeah.
All good. Hi, Josh.
Hi, kamusta? I'm sorry, I was driving, but now I can share, so I'll be quick. So my name is Joshua Ang Price. Born and raised in the state of Arkansas. Also was a member of PhilPro Batch 7 in 2018, and was also president of PhilPro in 2020, and I'm currently on the board. Yes, so living in Arkansas, it is a politically polarizing state. I don't want to get political, but it is a very red state. We see a lot of racism here on the daily basis, somewhat directed to the AA and HPI community, but mostly towards the Black and Hispanic and Latinx community. So really just want to learn more how I can be a partner to these other ethnic groups, stand in solidarity, and be able to help them and use the privilege we sometimes have as AANHPI as the quote unquote model minority to also advocate for our other brothers and sisters who may be repressed and oppressed by different government policies. I've worked for the federal government and the state government for a long time, so I kind of see these policies in action. So just want to see how we can talk to our communities about being allies to other groups that are encountering repression through these government policies.
Mhm. Thanks, Joshua. Thanks so much. And I appreciate you still wanting to introduce yourself too. And yeah, thank you for sharing your story. All right. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to start off with unpacking our why, not only why we're here, but also why as Filipinos, it's crucial for us to engage in racial justice work. We're going to move forward with some case studies around Filipino American movements that cultivated this work in itself within history and present time. And then we are also going to be talking about taking action, and what that looks like, and some reflection activities in the end, which, as I mentioned earlier, will not be recorded. Okay. Okay. Just a quick primer before we dive deep. Just want to make sure that we are all on the same page when we're talking about racial justice. And I want to read off this definition here. I really like the definition by Navigating Impact, which defines racial justice as a proactive reinforcement of policies, practices, attitudes, and actions that produce equitable power, access, opportunities, treatment, impacts, and outcomes for all. So you can see those keywords: policies, practices. It really touches on systemic pieces in here, in systemic pieces, actions, and attitudes, including maybe our interpersonalized and interpersonal and internalized actions and behaviors that not only impacts ourselves, our view of ourselves, but also with that of our other people and how we engage in community with others, while of course addressing the aim for equitable power, access, and opportunities. There's a really key definition here that speaks about racial justice going beyond anti-racism, which is also important to note, because it is not, racial justice is not just the absence of discrimination and inequities, but also the presence of deliberate systems where everyone can thrive and have the life to fulfill their utmost potential. And we also talk about here, it supports people's rights for supports to achieve and sustain racial equity through proactive and preventative measures, including repairing past and current harms. And we're going to talk about quite a bit around past harms, and we're going to start off around the Filipino community as we unpack our why. Okay. And as I mentioned earlier already, unpacking our why is really critical in this work, because engaging in racial justice work is long-term, right? It's long-term, it requires endurance and commitment in our lifetimes, and it is often hard. It feels like an uphill battle for the most part. And I find that I am able to commit to this work wholeheartedly when I remind myself, why am I doing this work in the first place? I ground myself into my values, into the why of this work and my engagement to this work, especially when times are very difficult, when times where I feel like we're not getting any wins, or it feels like it's getting a bit more hopeless, right? So I really just want to preface that and hopefully give folks the primer and understanding that this work will be difficult. It's not easy, and for many of you who are already in it, you probably know how difficult it is. So grounding ourselves with the why is important. Okay, I'm going to start off with our colonial history, Filipino people's colonial history, which many of you may probably already know, but I think it's important to still start off with that. 333 years of Spanish colonization, 48 years of American colonization, 3 years of Japanese colonization. And Filipino people to this day continue to endure the trauma that hundreds of years of colonization have brought us. And if you think about the Spanish colonization era, we've been brainwashed to think that our people are inferior to that of the colonizers. For example, if you think about how the Spaniards instilled a racial hierarchy, which afforded legal and social powers to those at the top, aka the Spanish people, and systemically disenfranchised those at the bottom, aka indigenous peoples of the Philippines. And then there is the American imposed education system and the imposition of a Western-centric curriculum, which often marginalized indigenous knowledge and cultural heritage and preference of Western ideals. I've studied in the Philippines from preschool up until I was in university, and it's a very unfortunate thing that I've come to learn English so much more than one of the 180 or so languages back home. I can speak Tagalog very well, but I also have roots in Pangasinan, where my lolo speaks Ilocano, or roots in Bicol, where my lola speaks Bicolana, and my father coming from Samar, where they speak Bisaya, and I do not know any of those languages. But what I've come to remember is that I have been learning English since I was probably in preschool, right? So there's a lot of those repression of our identity and language that came with not only the impacts of colonization, but how it really persists to this day. All of this to say, many nations' colonial history has repressed people's identities, as I mentioned, including us Filipinos, and it led many to believe in our own people's inferiority in one way or another. And when colonialism has successfully taught people this mindset, it also brings people to believe that perhaps we may be deserving of the oppression that we are experiencing. And this is why these ideals are very much rooted in white supremacy. And I just want to define white supremacy here very quickly before we move on to the next slide. White supremacy culture is the ideology that white people and the ideas, thoughts, beliefs, and actions of white people are superior to people of color and other ideas, thoughts, beliefs, and actions. It is also the root cause of racial inequity, leading to the need of racial justice to begin with, leading to the need of power imbalances across the racial lines. And this is why it's even more crucial for us to understand the oppression our people experienced through colonialism in the past and to this day, right? So we can actively unlearn them and dismantle them in our everyday lives. So I'm going to be showing some case studies, some examples of how colonialism have impacted us. Again, I cannot comprehensively go through our long history and really deep history, especially within colonialism, but I'm going to be sharing some examples in here. And the first one being the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, right? And throughout American history, many folks may know the term quote unquote savage has been wielded to rationalize the mistreatment and oppression of many peoples, making racism under the guise of American altruism, right? This label has been applied to indigenous peoples of the Philippines as well. It has it's been invoked to justify the colonization of lands with the premise that America is tasked with civilizing nations, including the Philippines. And this is an example here in the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair. It was basically created to be a human zoo, in which one of the exhibits featured the Igorot people, which, according to anthropologist Albert Jenks, he believed that they were one of the most uncivilized tribes in the Philippines. And this exhibit also sparks the creation of negative stereotypes of the Igorot people and the Filipino community overall. And in this era, anthropologists also embrace an evolutionary viewpoint that have held the superiority of white culture over, the very people, indigenous peoples that they were portraying in this World Fair. Another example that we have here, quote unquote, the Filipinos' first bath. This is a cartoon or a comic that showed the prevailing narrative at the start of the Philippine-American War in 1899, which went on until 1902. This print shows Filipinos receiving the quote-unquote bath of civilization as provided by the U.S. government. Image from the Facebook is this image from the Facebook page of Berna Ilirgin. You'll see a lot of citations and sources throughout this deck here, just to give folks the context of where we've gotten this information, and of course for responsible presentation practices too. You'll see here the Filipino baby is screaming and crying, being given a bath by a concerned father, right? Instilling narratives of the Philippines as a helpless child that's dependent on US for culture and civilization. And it's again one of this this caricature is also rooted to the Filipino culture being perceived as uncivilized and backward, similar to the narrative that we've shared earlier around the St. Louis Fair. And lastly, we've talked about colonization as in how it actually perceived us Filipino people over time. But there is also the context of anti-Black imagery being a conventional way, according to Ad Surfacing Life here, US publics could comprehend the relation between US imperialism and Filipino people, right? Anti-Blackness was the lingua franca for apprehending where Filipinos would fit within US racial hierarchy. And you can see here in this cartoon, again, in this cartoon, the text in the paper says, make the Filipino free, give him self-government. And then there's another paper that says, the Southerns must not rule, he must not vote, right? So early on, we're already seeing how not only colonialism have imposed, internalized inferiority onto us Filipino people, but there's also a lot of narratives around colonialism being a wedge between Filipino people and the Black community over time. Thanks, Mark. I see some resources being shared by Mark here in the chat around the St. Louis World's Fair. And yes, thank you for noting the being recognized finalists for the Pulitzer Prize. Okay, any questions or thoughts or comments at that part before we move forward? Thank you to folks sharing resources in the chat. Highly recommend folks to do so as we go forward with this presentation. Okay. Our history of resistance. Oh, I skipped very quickly. Okay. Aside from contextualizing colonialism of our people, I'm going to check the chat very quickly just so I'd come up. Yeah, thanks, Gabriel. Thanks so much. All right. So aside from contextualizing colonialism or experiences of colonialism as Filipino people and its relationship to white supremacy, it's also important to recognize that we have a strong history of resistance. You know, and as much as we've been severely impacted by colonization, we also are a nation that has resisted it. Okay? And when we say resistance, we mean people's movements and actions against oppression towards freedom and liberation. And I wanna share this very critical part when speaking about racial justice, because it's really essential to recognize that resistance is intricately woven in our heritage, in our culture, in our lineage and history as Filipinos. And you will see here from the Filipino rebellion against colonial occupation to the people power revolutions and the ongoing advocacy against anti-people governance and indigenous red tagging in the Philippines, immersing in resistance is an inherent aspect of being Filipino. Whether we acknowledge it or not, our identity exudes resistance. And really the profound history of revolution in the Philippines significantly shaped the lives, the privileges, and survival of Filipinos today. So as you engage in this work, many people may doubt why you're doing this work, because we've over time being an advocate for racial justice or being an activist or being an organizer has been villainized, right? Because it's not in line with the way we see someone politely abiding by societal rules. But as you engage in this space, as you learn about our people's history of resistance, let no one cast a doubt on your right to advocate for racial justice and a more equitable system, because as Filipinos, fighting against injustices runs in our blood. And with that, I want to highlight the Philippine Revolution. And you'll see here, this is a painting of the Battle of Zapote Bridge during the Philippine Revolution by Vicente Dizon, right? From the collection of the Museo ni Emilio Aguinaldo from Kawit, Cavite, Philippines. And the Philippine Revolution as some of you may know, or all or many of you may know, is a war of independence waged by the revolutionary organization Katipunan, led by Andres Bonifacio, against the Spanish Empire from 1896 to 1898. Right? The revolution led to the end of Spanish colonial rule, although it also led to the Philippines being sold to the Americans afterward. It still proved an instrumental and significant portion of Philippine history, with Filipino people resisting colonialism. We also have the People Power Revolution. Our nation have ousted not one, but two presidents over time, right, in our history. So you have here the 1986 EDSA People Power Revolution, ousting Ferdinand Marcos, ending the martial law and his dictatorship. And then the second photo here at the bottom, the colored photo, is the Second People Power Revolution, EDSA 2001, or what many people call EDSA Dos. Right? It was a political protest in January 2001, which particularly overthrew the government of Joseph Ejercito Estrada. And then you've seen these photos, but I think I could have probably given you a better photo of how many people really marched the streets of EDSA during these times. I think EDSA Dos in itself, they approximately estimated about 2 million people marching in EDSA against the to overthrow Joseph Ejercito Estrada, but also there's even more during the People Power Revolution in 1986. So you see here in these photos, there's definitely huge emphasis on collective power in our history. Filipino people in the homeland have used collective power in organizing and rallying big numbers of community members and Filipino people to unite towards one goal. And lastly, there's also our Filipino values when talking about why. Right? It's very important for us to understand the values that's inherent in our culture to begin with, and how they apply to racial justice movements and our roles in racial justice movements. Right? So there are two core Filipino principles that you see here, pakikipagkapwa or kapwa and bayanihan, which really prioritizes the well-being of ourselves and our community. And we can think of this in the context of cross-racial organizing or cross-racial solidarity, right? We Filipinos are known for our strong sense of community, and with values like this, like kapwa, aka shared humanity in English, and bayanihan, communal support in English, it really is a great way to sort of encapsulate what values we can root from, especially ones that can guide our actions in doing this work. There's also values of isang bagsak, which translates to one down, and we're going to be talking a bit more about its roots later on, but it encapsulates our collective and interconnected well-being, right? If one person falls, we all fall, and if one rises, we all rise. And it really does remind us that our well-being is linked, and when one community suffers, it affects us all, further proving that our role in collective liberation has always been ingrained in our values and our history, and that there's so many involvement, not just in the Philippines, of Filipino people across the world in the history of fighting for justice. Okay. We're going to move into, as I segue into that, we're going to move into Filipino-American movements that cultivated racial justice work. And then as we talk about this, I'm also going to be sharing some of the learnings that we can take away from them. And hopefully those learnings can also be added to people's toolkits and engaging in racial justice work moving forward. Okay. I'm just gonna drink my water for a bit. If folks have any questions, feel free to continue sharing the chat or resources too. All right. Many folks probably know the context of the Delano grape strike. Actually, does anyone know? I want to make sure that I'm sharing the space and recognizing too that many folks may have knowledge about this. So if anyone would like to share, what do you know about the slide here, feel free to raise your hand or share in the chat. Okay, that's all good. If folks still want to share. So Filipinos have a long history of organizing alongside Latinx farm workers in the United States, including during the 1960s and the Delano Grape Strike, a movement that demanded fair wages, better working conditions, and including pesticide safety for racialized farm workers. It was led by Larit Leong, Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, Philip Vera Cruz, to name a few. And the said organizing and mobilizations of this community members and like labor movement members have really led to union contracts for farm workers in 1970, securing them better pay, benefits, and protections. So what we've learned from this movement, specifically, one, collective action works, right? And when we talk about engaging in racial justice movements in this space, I really, really want to emphasize that you should not be doing this alone, because we're so much more powerful when we engage in movements where there's collective action. And what we mean by collective action is that it refers to actions taken together by a group of people whose goal is to enhance their condition and achieve a common objective. Very similar to the example that I've shared just earlier with Filipino and Latinx farm workers uniting together to achieve workers' rights and justice. And also solidarity strengthens us, right? Solidarity can push for stronger anti-discrimination laws and policies that benefit everyone. Doing solidarity with not just within our own community members, but also with that of others, it's really proof that we can change systems, that we have the power, regardless of what our place in the society, we have the power to change systems around us, especially around collective and organized community organizing. There's also the examples of Asians and Filipinos, Filipinx. Oh yes, Gabriel, go ahead. I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you for the space. I first of all, thank you for the frame. I'm also on the move, which is why I'm off camera. But I wanted to just share one of the things about the leadership of the Filipino farm workers during that era, and how the story is told or not told in U.S. curriculum, largely written out the role of Larry Leong and Philip Vera Cruz, and the Filipino farm workers actually led and pushed for the strike and some of the tactics and strategies that led to success and victory. And even though, of course, honoring the cross-racial solidarity, just important to name that Filipinos were at the helm and at the lead of the of that movement. So it's not to I just want to honor that, because again, back to your point earlier about model minority and wrestling with some of the stereotypes around AAPI largely, and just knowing that, again, our people throughout history have been fearless leaders, particularly in that movement. I just wanted to lift that up. So thank you for the space.
Yeah, no, thanks, Gabriel. It's really good to know. And I was hoping you can also jump in knowing that you're in the labor movement. So that's a really good context, important context to know. Yeah, I believe there's also article published. I'm going to clarify this if I got this wrong, because I'm going to be sharing resources to everyone after, but article published at the NPR around how definitely the movement and the leadership of Larit Leong and the Filipino farm workers have been overshadowed in specifically in this part of history. So thank you for amplifying that further. And also the practice of isang bagsak definitely was rooted in this movement too. Okay, and there's also the context around Asians, Filipinos, Filipinx, Filipinas for Black Lives, right? And this is something that many folks may still also be remembering, as it is a bit more recent. We're getting more and more to the more contemporary times. Oh, yes, it is NPR. Okay, I'm glad to know that I got it right. Thanks, Gabriel, for linking it in the chat. And as many folks know, May 2020, George Floyd was a 46-year-old Black American man was murdered in Minneapolis by a police officer, which I will not be named oftentimes in the spaces. I'd rather name the people that we are honoring over the bad actors in the space. So really want to be centering the space for the folks that we are honoring here today. And that really led to liberation movements and uprising, all not only within America, but also across the world. Specifically here in Canada, there's a lot of very similar movements that took place as well, not only across the larger API and Asian communities, but also within the Filipinx, and Filipino communities. With that being said, I also want to frame this part by recognizing that the term model minority myth, which Gabriel also mentioned earlier, is very much rooted from Black movements. And again, if you folks remember that cartoon that I've sort of introduced at the beginning around how us Filipinos have already been used during earlier colonial times as a tool to sort of become a wedge against the Black community, it continues to happen. Such examples continue to happen over time. And I want to define model minority myth before we move forward, but I just want to read here the definition of it being a sociological phenomenon that refers to the stereotype of, as well as actually data on certain minority groups, particularly Asian Americans, as successful and well-adjusted, as demonstrating that there is little or no need for social or economic assistance of the same or different minority groups. So many folks may probably know this. I think some of your introductions have already mentioned this earlier too, but we are often perceived as the good minority, right? That's why the term model minority have came to be. But according to densho.org, and this is again another source that I'm going to be sharing after this session, the stereotypes that inform the model minority myth for the broader Asian community can be traced all the way back to the systems of slavery and genocide upon which this country was built. We also think about the white supremacist beliefs that have held them over time. For example, during the 1960s and the 1980s, the Civil Rights Act and Black activism improved opportunities for many Asian Americans in housing, education, and jobs, really thanks to the Black liberation movement. However, discriminatory practices like redlining and aggressive policing continued to hinder progress, particularly affecting Black and Brown communities. Additionally, it also overlooked the stories of Southeast Asian refugees being displaced in impoverished areas, also elderly residents displaced by urban renewal and gentrification, including the impact of Filipino people, its impact on Filipino people, such as the lack of social services and displacement of our community in Manila town, right? So the model minority myth not only is a very, as it says in the name, it's a myth, it wedges our community against many other racialized communities. It also hinders opportunities for ourselves, right? It's because of the notion that we don't need more, we don't need support, so we won't be getting them. But in reality, there's so many more in the community that are struggling and that are being displaced, especially for that of in the lower class and folks who are already struggling to begin with. Right? So I really just want to contextualize that it is one of those privileges that many folks have mentioned. I think, Joshua, you've mentioned that earlier at the beginning. It's one of those privileges that we want to be acknowledging and recognizing, while also unpacking in a way that how do we play in this whole racial structure of, okay, our communities being divided or being used as a wedge against other communities, especially that of the Black and Indigenous communities, while also recognizing that we too face our own struggles. Yeah. Going back to our really nuanced community guideline, Joshua here in the chat, we are model minorities until we do something to take them off, speak out, yep, or rise up, or they need someone to blame for something, then they throw us under the bus, COVID-19. Yeah, that is definitely a really, really good point. Thanks, Joshua. As long as we're obedient and stay in our boxes, then we are model minorities. And that's also another piece that I want to, thanks Joshua for reminding me, another piece that I want to connect it to is that, you know, there's always this saying around the Filipino community, oh, you shouldn't be speaking up because you are going to ruin our community's reputation of working hard, or you shouldn't be speaking up or challenging systems because you should just abide by the law or be polite all the time. You're going to ruin opportunities for yourselves and for everyone. And it's always centered around that hard work, right? The context of model minority always being centered around hard work. And I often think about myself as someone who has been in this journey for such a long time. I say to myself, racial justice is hard work, right? Trying to dismantle systems of oppression is hard work. Trying to get to a point of liberation, or for our people, trying to achieve liberation for our people, prosperity for our people, get to a point where our people are thriving within this lifetime, that is hard work. And I think we really want to be contextualizing what hard work we're talking about here, because who are we working hard for, right? Because I know for me, I and going back to our conversation of values, I try to work hard for our community, for all racialized and oppressed communities that are to this day still losing lives, right? That to this day are still struggling. So again, there's a lot to challenge in these notions that we hear all the time in our community, but also the notions that we hear from people who are trying to talk into us. So thanks, Joshua, for sharing that in the chat, because that really reminded me of that point. Okay, are folks still good? Can I get a reaction in the chat? How are we feeling? Or like emoji? Do we call it Zoom emojis? How are we feel? Can we see some thumbs up? Okay, we're still good. Thanks, folks. We also are here for about an hour and a half, and if the session finishes early, we're all good, definitely. But just want to do a quick check. Okay, great. Thanks, Gabriel. All right. I know many folks, all of you have shared some context in your registration form. So just want to make sure that we honor some of the pieces that folks wanted to learn more about in your registrations. And one of them that quite a few have brought up, oh, actually, before we move forward to the next one, thanks to my slides for reminding me what's the next part in this session, what we've learned from the Black Lives Matter movement. And one of those is that we should be always centering the voices of the community we're advocating for, right? A lot of what we've learned during this uprising is unpacking how our community specifically have also been, not only through the model minority myth, which is a huge part of it, but how our community have also been complicit to anti-Blackness through our own history of colonialism, what's been imparted on us, and what we've been told we should be believing in terms of our own skin color, whether it be through appropriating Black culture. There's so much that we've learned about unpacking that specifically from this era of social justice. So always, especially when doing cross-racial solidarity work, always ensure that we are centering the voices of the community we're advocating for over our own, especially if we do not have the lived experience of said community. We also need to dismantle the ways we've internalized racism against other communities, sort of like piggybacking what I just said earlier. And I just want to mention this quote here: "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house," by Audre Lorde. Again, going back to our point around model minority myth. Okay, I mentioned earlier that quite a few folks have added in the registration, and it's very timely and very important to talk about. a very current situation that we'd love to really unpack, not really unpack, but also address is there's a lot to learn from Filipino and Palestinian solidarity that is happening currently, right? And folks have asked questions around in your registration forms. People have said, oh, I'd love to learn more about the links of the struggles of Filipino and Palestinian people. And we'll unpack that a bit right now. I won't be able to go through a lot of the context here, but I'll definitely be sharing some resources after as well. I know Lisel mentioned, shared the link to our website, Pinay Collection, but we also have a couple of blogs there that really unpacks a lot of the interconnected struggles between the Philippines and Palestine. Okay. Oh yeah, thanks, Kat. Yeah, I haven't been to any of the meetings. Yeah, we kind of have our own organizing here in Canada too. We're called Filipinos United for Palestine, but I know F4P has really brought up the game around collective movement, Filipino movement, and organizing in solidarity and support of Palestine. So definitely feel free to check out their website. It's filipinosforpalestine.com or .org. I'll share that later. So in terms of just dimensions around interconnected struggles and links, the Philippines actually receive military weapons from Israel, which are the same weapons used to attack land defenders and activists in the motherland. In fact, the Philippines is the third largest buyer of these weapons. We're talking about $275 million, right? And the Israel military also trained the Philippine military on counter-terror tactics at a time when Duterte equated activism with terrorism, which evidently has its impacts in the red tagging of Filipino activists, indigenous peoples, and land defenders to this day. So there's that one core connection, not only with just the Filipino identity, but Filipino people in the homeland. There's another piece around Israel is currently the largest cumulative recipient of US military aid, and specific in the context of Filipino Americans, right? We're talking about billions in dollars. And this relationship not only ensures that Israel gets top quality weaponry, but also provides research and development for security and defense technologies. Not only are these technologies used in the regular military occupation used in the genocide of the Palestinian people, but similar technologies are also used in places like the Philippines, right? So you already see there the interconnectedness of how the same weaponry, how the same military forces are manifesting oppression of not only that of the Palestinian people, but it's also used to oppress our own people. And there's a lot to learn from this current movement that is happening now, including our struggles with that of many other communities are interconnected, right? Yes, we want prosperity, we want equity for our people, for Filipinx, Filipino people, but we also want to recognize that we definitely, and really the next slide here, I'm going to go through and I'm going to go back. We want to recognize that none of us is free until everybody is free. And this really good quote by Maya Angelou. Right? When we talk about the impacts of colonialism, we've already established early on that colonialism not only impacts one certain group of people, it impacts many, and has been the root of root cause of white supremacy, which is the root cause of why racial justice needs to be done at the first place. And so it's really important for us to view solidarity not just for the liberation of our people, freedom and liberation of our people, but also freedom and liberation of the collective. And I see, sorry, Ted, I'm not able to share the link that you just shared in the chat, but I'll check it out later. Another point here, learning point that I want to highlight is that it's critical to seek and create meaningful relationships with the people we are advocating for. And some of the great things that F4P, Filipinos for Palestine, have done is really connecting with the Palestinian youth movement and working alongside them to ensure that they, while not being Palestinians, are very much in tune with how how to support their work, their collective liberation, collective movement, and how to really be grounded in the right ways of solidarity. Okay, I'm just gonna check in the chat. And I see Ted here. What happens when activists are branded terrorists in the Philippines? Indigenous activists live from day to day as they try to hide from authorities and challenge designations in court. Definitely, and that's what we call red tagging. So red tagging can come in many different ways. When folks are branded terror activists. Oh, sorry. What happens when activists are branded? Yeah, when activists are branded as terrorists in the Philippines, there often comes the process of red tagging them, whether that be, I personally know people and activists back home who've been red tagged, and it's really continuous harassment from state forces. I can definitely share more resources on that later on, but it's not an easy journey to begin with. It is definitely a quite disturbing story. Unfortunately, in the South, there are cases in Mindanao, there are cases of activists being red tagged and houses being burnt. There's some arson involved, so there's a lot of ongoing harassment. And if folks are really interested in learning more about this, I'd highly recommend checking out the story of the Lumad people, Lumad communities and indigenous community in the Philippines who continues to face red tagging from many different angles, unfortunately. And there's a lot of cases around missing indigenous peoples and also folks who have been murdered. Thanks, Ted, for bringing that up. And I see Joshua here. Maya Angelou is from Arkansas. Okay, grew up about an hour from where I did. Thanks for sharing that connection. I definitely did not know that Maya Angelou is from Arkansas. And the last piece here, the digital tools that we have in our fingertips is something that have really given us easier ways to start our solidarity journey. Something that we're seeing unfold within the Palestinian solidarity movement is that many people have either started or joined collective movements or like organizing movements through social media. So you'll see perhaps many neighborhood groups who started organizing within their neighborhoods and found more community members to join them in solidarity through social media, Facebook groups, or Instagram pages. You'll also see a lot of people definitely getting their information and also ways to build solidarity through direct voices that are coming from Gaza, from Palestine, from Rafah. So there's a lot of evolution that came when it comes to organizing to present day and how we've utilized digital tools to not only be in tune with the community that we're trying to build solidarity with, but also start our own organizing within the communities that we have influence over. So really just want to frame that because we all have we all have power and control over our own digital platforms, and we can definitely use them. All right. Very quick summary here in terms of I hope you all got that we're already engaging in taking action, the ways that we're taking action as we check out those case studies. But a very quick summary here, really building solidarity means that it's important you work alongside the communities that you're supporting, that you're advocating for. And that is a core principle of racial justice work, is understanding and centering the voices, especially of the people that you're trying to advocate for. And even within our own Filipino community, when we think about advocating for the Filipino community, right? Unpacking our own privileges as we advocate for our community, because for me, it's an example as someone who is a straight woman who is also working, and very privileged to have many different flow and source of income. When I advocate for the Filipino community, I want to think it's important for me to think about the intersections of my advocacy, right? Am I only speaking for people like me, or is it also important to speak about migrant Filipinos, for example, who may not have the same privileges when it comes to sources of income or their workplaces? Maybe it's also important to understand and understand the realities and struggles of LGBTQIA Filipinos, Filipinx, and Filipinas, in that context of how their identities may also have given them less advantages and opportunities. It's also important to think about what are the different communities that we may not be currently connected with, and in the context of advocating for Filipinx, Filipinas, and Filipinos, who are we leaving behind, right? There's also a piece around redistributing resources, support, and power, and that really is the core of dismantling our privileges, asking ourselves, what are we willing to give up? Whether that be ongoing organized monetary donations to movements that matter to you, the movements that you want to support, if you have the means to do so. Perhaps you want to give up time, energy by attending meetings, learning from the communities that you're building solidarity with, reading resources, books that they recommend, right? Or perhaps volunteering your time and volunteering time to their actions, to the way they organize, and learning from them in that manner. Advocate and mobilize and joining collective actions, as we established earlier. And then lastly, there's a huge piece here around taking ownership and accountability. Because in this work, when you do racial justice work, there's no room for pride in it. Right? We've talked about dismantling our privileges, reflecting on what we can offer. It's also important to know that pride shouldn't come first, especially when engaging in this movement. With this work, we embrace the emotions that come out of the process, and we understand that we may feel uncomfortable, and sometimes we may feel challenged or hurt because there are times where we didn't realize that what we may have done is wrong. It's only because we're all under the same structure, under the same systems that have really tried to colonize our minds and our being, right? And when we think of it that way, all of us will make mistakes. As someone who's been doing this work for over a decade, I still continue to make mistakes to this day, but I will not let pride get in the way with that. Because with pride, it also comes to the understanding that I will continue to learn, and there's no way that I can learn, that I know everything, that I will know everything there is to know in this work, especially when I'm engaging in work that is not my lived reality. So the way I see it, it's an honor to trust, right? To receive a chance to be a better person through this journey, to learn, to grow, and to do things differently, especially when we make mistakes. And that when others are also taking the time to educate us, or to tell us, oh, you should be saying, or oh, you should be doing this instead of that, or actually you made a mistake here, or can I just let you know that maybe perhaps next time this is what you can do better. We will do better because of that, because of the people who continue to hold us accountable, who continue to call us in, and continue to be in community with us, regardless of the mistakes that we make. All right, let's breathe very quickly. I'm gonna drink my water. Any questions, any comments from folks? Hi, Ted.
Hello. Thank you for, yeah, it's great. You always know it's a good presentation when you have more questions than when you started. So thank you. It's fascinating. I wonder if you could comment on the role of collaborators. We all know throughout history that, for example, in the Spanish times, there were people who collaborated with the Spanish. There were Filipinos who collaborated with the Americans, and there were Filipinos who collaborated with the Japanese when they controlled the Philippines. Because sometimes the presentation like that you're making can appear to some people as, okay, for example, in the case of the Americans, where it's, the great white father is just sort of lording it over the little brown people. And that's, in those cartoons that you showed, that's certainly how it looks. But there were quite a few collaborators who maybe could be called sellouts. Could you comment on that? aspect of it? And because perhaps many of these people today are ruling the Philippines, who position themselves in a place of power rather than with the people.
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing that up, Ted. And I think I'm just gonna go back to the actually Audre Lorde quote that I mentioned earlier, is that we believe that the master tools will never dismantle the master's house, right? And it also goes to the piece around perhaps the more negative side of the model minority myth too, is that many people truly embody that. Many people, I know some folks in the community who have gone to embody that, okay, maybe I'm better off with the embodying white supremacy, or maybe I'm better off just going by the flow of colonial systems. And it is why it's even more important to view the point and the piece around collaboration, with collaboration with the oppressed, with collaboration with the folks who are marginalized that we are doing this work with. So that, again, we go back to our context of why we're doing this to begin with. And if we really establish that inherently, individually, it's much easier to answer the question, the questions that we may have in our heads. Because when you ask me that question, Ted, what came to mind is that I'm doing this for the oppressed people globally. And I think having to do that, having to contextualize it that way makes me more grounded in who I'm doing this for, and not specifically for the people who are already have rendered us inferior to begin with. I hope that makes sense. And I'd have to have more conversations to Ted later on.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to know if you maybe thought that these collaborator people were sellouts to their own people.
And I think we're all also under the colonial, it's all under the colonial system of what colonialism have tried to make us think, right? They've all tried to make us think that it's better off to be abiding by colonial views or views of white supremacy culture. And it's hard, and that's why it's more important for us to have this conversation so that we can expand it later on within our circles, or perhaps within the people who may think would need these conversations more. And I see Jody here around the comment of light-skinned Filipinos also tend to look down on darker-skinned Filipinos. Yeah, we definitely have our inter-community struggles that we also need to be unpacking further. Thanks, Toby. Toby's also a team member of Tayo. It's amazing. Okay, we got here from Gabriel, even the tribal leader that collaborated, yeah, with Magellan versus Lapu-Lapu, as the saying goes, all skin folk and kinfolk. Yeah, that said, it is difficult to judge my own sisters and brothers that are seeking to survive. Yeah, definitely. Again, I truly believe, and I've seen people can change. I try to think and be more great, approach this work with so much more grace, because I've seen people change, and we are all victims of the same system. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about in the part 2, the next part of this session, is actually how do we have those conversations within our community, and what are those pieces, like Jody mentioned, that we need to be unpacking and having conversations with our people. Okay. I'm mindful of time, and I really want to make sure that we get to the reflection part of this activity. So what I'm going to do, we've already quite talked about taking action, really, as what we can do as we unpack those case studies of solidarities, Filipino American solidarities that we've mentioned earlier. So I want to quickly go through this, and then we'll go to the last part of our activity, which is some reflections that folks can share. Okay. I want to go back to our definition of racial justice at the beginning. Racial justice is the proactive reinforcement of policies, practices, attitudes, and actions. Right? We also want to think about internalized, interpersonal, and systemic. How racism manifests within the society and the systems that are around us in our institutions, how it manifests within us interpersonally. Jody shared a good example around how there are colorism, how colorism exists within the Filipino community. That's an example of interpersonal, and then internalized, right? So for example, for me, when I was a kid, I would always pinch my nose, and I've been taught to pinch my nose because I was told that my nose is too flat, right? And that's something that I've come to internalize, and I've had a long battle with my insecurity about who I am and about my own self because of this colonial beliefs, right? So it damages our individual and internalized way of knowing ourselves, and then within our community, and then within the systems that we're in. So with that, we talked about that earlier, so I'm going to skip very quickly. I wanted to give us some time to be a bit more quiet, and I'm not going to require everyone to share after, but I'm going to give folks about 5 minutes to think about 3 questions as we close off, right? So 3 questions, and the first one is, how are you going to heal and unlearn? That means, how do you commit to unlearning colonial and racist ideals? This is pertaining to our internalized ways of understanding colonialism and how it harmed us. We want to ask you the question, how are you going to heal and unlearn? Because that is crucial in engaging racial justice work, not just the actions that we do within the systems and the collective actions that we do, but also how we are actually unlearning a lot of these colonial beliefs. The second question is, how are you engaging your community in this work? That being said, who are you sharing today's learning with? How do you plan to address racism within your circles? Those are just some of the questions that you'll be answering. Don't worry about taking notes. I'm going to be sharing a platform where all of these questions will be, and you can answer them anonymously. So again, the second question is, how are you engaging your community in this work? That refers to the interpersonal piece that I was talking about earlier. And lastly, how are you planning to tackle racist systems? This is a bit of a bigger question, but some sub-questions that can help you contextualize this is, which systems do you have influence over currently? Is it your workplace? Is it perhaps the smaller team in your workplace? Is it your community? You have influence around our elected officials. We all have, especially, many of us have, especially if you're voters, right? You have the power to contact your elected officials. Maybe it's your child, your children's school, or the community spaces around you. Think about those systems and institutions that you may have influence over, okay? And then as you think about that, how do you plan to dismantle racism within these institutions? Okay. So as folks start sort of answering in your head those questions, I'm just going to stop sharing so that I can share with you the link in which you can answer these questions very quickly. Here we go. Okay. So if you go to that link, sorry.
Oh, Jovi, do you want me to stop the recording?
Oh, yes.
Are we
If you can
good?
stop the recording
Okay.
in this, thanks, Lizelle. Thanks for the reminder. All right. So